morning and welcome to Carrizo Canyon. My name is Colin. I'm here with my fellow California naturalists, Tracy and Elizabeth, and today we're going to hike Carrizo Canyon. Carrizo Canyon is one of the kind of special trails here in the Coachella Valley because it's got a great chance of seeing bighorn sheep. There's some really fantastic geology and views available from the trail. And most importantly, it's only open for 3 months out of the year when the bighorn sheep are not in their lambing season. And it's open right now. So we're going to go hike it and see what we see. The trail is part of the Carrizo Canyon Ecological Reserve, which is set aside to protect the bighorn sheep. It's never guaranteed to see them, but there's as good a chance of seeing them here as about anywhere. And I like to say that the bighorn sheep are here in the canyon and they're going to see you no matter what. And so the trick is for you to try and be a good enough naturalist or a good enough observer to see them. So try to be in the moment as you walk down the trail and keep your eyes peeled for the ridgelines. One of the most common places is, say, bighorn sheep will be looking up at the tops of the ridgelines where a big ram bighorn sheep will be looking down at you and making sure that you're not coming after his herd of females that he's traveling with. One of the fascinating parts of this trail is getting to see the different environments and the different plants and animals associated with each environment as you continue up the trail. So in the beginning, you'll be walking through this desert wash. And you'll know that you're in a desert wash because you'll be seeing this plant here, which is the smoke tree or Sorothamnus spinosus. It's a member of the bean family, and it's kind of an iconic member of the desert community here in the valley. You'll see it, it looks like a puff of smoke coming up from the horizon in the distance, and as you get close to it, it has these wonderful spiky gray needles that keep things from browsing on it. And one of the really interesting adaptations that the smoke tree has to the desert wash environment here, it really likes and in fact needs to have periodic flooding for them to be able to germinate and create new baby little smoke trees and perpetuate themselves. And the way it does that is it will bloom in the early summer and have these beautiful indigo flowers and then create seeds and drop their seeds down in the sand here. And as the seeds drop to the ground, they are actually too thick for them to be able to germinate just sitting on the ground like that. Hopefully they'll get some late summer monsoon rains or winter rains, which will then pick up those seeds in a big flash flood event and tumble them around in all of the stuff that comes with a flash flood, like decomposed granite and rocks and things like that. And the seeds are thick and tough enough to survive that tumbling action. In fact, they need that tumbling action to sort of sand off the hard outer coating a little bit so that the germ inside of the seed is able to break free and grow. And you can think about how perfect this adaptation is, because when they fall just on the ground here in the dry desert, the covering is too thick and the seed can't break out and germinate. But once there's water, once you get that flash flood event, and once that seed coating wears down just enough so that they're able to break out, and you have all this wonderful life-giving water for the brief period of time in the desert, that's when the seed is able to take advantage of that, quickly put down a taproot deep into the ground so that it doesn't wash away in the next flash flood, and grow up into be a beautiful tree like this one. Take a look at this. What we have here is a cholla cactus. The genus is Cylindropuntia. Cacti are adapted to the dry desert conditions here by storing water in their stems. And as you can imagine, if you're a bighorn sheep or a rabbit or a pocket mouse or something like that living out here in the desert, and there's no drinking water to be found, this cacti, or the stems of this cacti, represent this really great water prize for you to have if you can get at them. Well, of course, the cacti aren't one to go quietly. They have this defenses of spines covering all over the whole plant. And yet, some animals still manage to get past those defenses. And here we can see a cholla that has been really kind of taken apart by possibly a jackrabbit or a pack rat or some small animal that's able to very carefully get around those spines and chew at the juicy flesh on the inside of the cactus. We're walking up the trail through the wash, and going in the wash can honestly be a little bit difficult. You know, you're walking through the soft sand, you're out exposed in the sun. So we've just rounded the corner and we're starting to get into the place where the canyon starts to narrow down, and there's a little bit of shade here. So it's a good opportunity to take a break, take a breath, and look around and see some of the things that you might have missed along the way so far. The plants are starting to change, and there's a few really interesting plants here, and the geology is starting to get really interesting. You're starting to see these really fantastic exposed slopes of metamorphic rock where there's banding and intrusions and dikes and all kinds of interesting geology going on here. More on that later, but just be aware of those things as you're starting to really get into the interesting part of the canyon here. So one of the plants you'll see while you're resting here in the shade is the desert lavender. Desert lavender is one of those plants in the desert that has a really wonderful smell to it. And there's actually a lot of plants in the desert that have different interesting smells that you may want to experience, or they may have different sensory experiences, the touch, even taste in some cases of things that you'll want to experience. But you need to be responsible and safe before doing any of that stuff, especially if you're going to taste something, right? A lot of desert plants have defenses in terms of spines or poisonous chemicals inside of them that are deadly to people. And they may have flowers that are attracting pollinating insects like honeybees and things like that that can sting people, especially if you have an allergy. You want to be really careful. So desert lavender, if you want to enjoy the smell, before you do, take a nice look at it and make sure you're not going to stick your face right into where the bees are being really active. And then you can find some good leaves here or flowers and just bring it up to your nose, and it smells really nice. If it's not smelling too much, you can kind of rub the leaves in between your fingers. And it really kind of activates the essential oils in there and really brings out the smell. It's a really fantastic smell here in the desert. Another plant that you'll find here in the shady parts of the canyon is desert tobacco. And it's actually in the same genus as the commercial tobacco, Nicotiana, and it would have been used by the Cahuilla in a similar fashion. Just like the lavender, you can rub the leaves between your fingers. You don't even have to be that close to it. You can get the tobacco smell from it really clearly. Just by rubbing the leaves at a distance and bringing them up to your fingers. It is a member of the nightshade family, and like all nightshades, has the potential to be very toxic, so you want to be a little more careful with this one. One of the things that is really fascinating and keeps you coming back to these places in the desert over and over again is that they're always changing. There's always something new to see, or something that's changed since the last time you were there. A rock that's moved position, a plant that started to flower, an animal coming out at a different time of day. Something is new every time you come back. It's never the same. And that's especially true in these canyon environments where flash floods can change the entire contour of the land in a day or an hour. And water really is the lifeblood of all of the plants and animals that are living in this area. They're out in the middle of the desert. There's a lot of plants and animals that are adapted to very little water. But here, things like this California fan palm need to have their roots in water all the time to survive. So when you see these fan palms, that's a good sign that there is water down underneath your feet. However, as you can see, this fan palm is dead. It is no longer alive. And in fact, I remember coming in here about 3 years ago, and the fan palm had nice green leaves and a full crown of fan-shaped leaves up at the top there. And then we left Carrizo Canyon for the season. It was closed for 9 months. And we came back in the fall again, and this is what it looked like. It had died in that interim 9 months. And what happened? Well, it stopped getting water. And why? There's probably a lot of different reasons. Maybe the underground springs that fed this area dried up, or rocks shifted and things moved. It's hard to see something like this and not think about climate change and the way that increasing dry conditions or variability between droughts and super floods or mega floods like we got a couple years ago on Valentine's Day are affecting the wildlife in the desert. And for something like this palm tree, it's not affecting it very well, obviously. It wasn't able to survive as the changes happened in the canyon here. As we keep going, we're going to see hopefully we're going to see some living palm trees and some areas that are still doing well and still getting water in their roots, but the desert is changing due to climate change around us, and this may be a sign of it. Really in the middle of the narrow part of the canyon here. The walls are getting close around us and they're very steep, going hundreds of feet up above our heads here. And this is the really preferred habitat of the bighorn sheep, where they are able to traverse up and down these cliff sides and escape from predators and forage across the slopes here for the things they like to eat. And you can see evidence in here of some of the stuff that they like to eat or will use to eat. We talked about animals eating the cacti for the water before, and here's another evidence of that. So this is a California barrel cactus that's just lying right in the middle of the trail, and it's all split apart. You can see the inside of the whole cacti here, and you can see where that sort of spongy flesh was able to soak up a lot of water when it was up on the hillsides. But it's down here in the middle of the trail now because bighorn sheep actually used their horns to knock it down off the side of the hill. And as it tumbled down, it would have sort of broken apart and exposed the fleshy parts of the cacti, so the bighorn sheep could get in there and eat the flesh without having to deal with all the thorns on the outside. So the cacti's defenses failed it when it got to the bottom here, and the bighorn sheep were able to eat all this stuff on the inside. So no bighorn sheep so far today, but they are certainly here. You can see the evidence of them all around us here. The further you go into Carrizo Canyon, the greater the evidence of the power of water around you. In fact, when you get to the place where most people are probably going to turn around on this trail, right here, you'll find this rock, which is really like the epitome of the power of water in this canyon. You can tell that because if you look at the physical makeup of this rock, it looks fairly granitic. It's lots of like black and white flecks. And if you look at the rocks around here, you see lots of this really heavily banded metamorphic rock. And the texture is very different, and you see these rounded edges, so they don't match. So this rock must have come from somewhere high up above us during a huge flash flood event, or most likely several huge flash flood events. At some point or another, water brought this rock down to this point, and at some point in the future, we'll get a big enough storm to bring this rock down to the bottom of the waterfall even further. But for now, it's found a good resting place. Sometimes when you're walking in the desert, at least when I'm walking in the desert, you get to this place where it just seems so wild. The rocks are just amazing collection of shapes and colors, and the plants look like they've been sitting in this same place that they've been for thousands of years, and you feel like you're the first person to have discovered this little patch of desert. But we know that that's not true. In fact, almost every time that I have that kind of feeling, I look down on my ground and I find some evidence of the people who've come here before us. And in fact, that's something that you can see right here in Carrizo Canyon. On this rock here, there's a bedrock mortar that's been ground into this rock right along the side of the trail. And bedrock mortars are places where the Cahuilla Indians, who were the original human inhabitants of the desert, would have come to process the foodstuffs that they found in the canyon here. And a lot of the plants out here don't necessarily look like the kinds of foods that you'll see when you go to the supermarket, but actually most of them would have been used in some form or other for either food or medicine. So right where we're sitting here, there's honey mesquite, which would have been ground up. The pods would have been ground up here. There's cat claw acacia, the same thing. There's seeds from the tuberosa, from the sweet bush, from the creosote bush. In fact, there are dozens of species found within just an arm's length of where I'm sitting that the Cahuilla would have used to survive out here in the desert. When we see the plants and the animals the way they are today, I think we take for granted that they have always been this way. But that's not really true. The Cahuilla were stewards of the land, and they manipulated the land in the ways that they needed to survive. And the marks of their stewardship are still here today. Even though this bedrock mortar may no longer be in use, the Cahuilla never left. They're still here. They're still stewards of the land. And we can still live by their example and learn to be in better balance with the desert and with the plants and the animals that are found here. We just rounded the corner of the canyon wall here and spotted these bighorn sheep up on the ridge above us. And it started out, you could just see the one right on the ridgeline. As you look closer, you'll start to see more and more of them. See about at least 3, maybe 4. Bighorn sheep tend to move in these family groups, either with a large group of females and yearlings and lambs, and maybe 1 or 2 rams who are sort of watching over that group. And then you'll also see bachelor herds sometimes, which are composed entirely of the males who are not yet in the sort of peak position. These ones all look like either young ones or females that I've seen so far. Of course, we're only seeing half the ridge, so it could be many more sheep on the other side, or at least a couple more sheep on the other side. One of the things I'm always on the lookout for as a naturalist in the desert is to try to discover those hidden connections between the things that you see along the trail. It's not always obvious, but the plants and the animals are connected, the plants and the rocks are connected, and each in its own way explains some part of the story of the rest of the plants and animals as well. Without this canyon, these particular plants wouldn't be here and these particular animals wouldn't be here. Without these mountains, this desert would not be here. And you can see the geological forces that explain both this canyon and these mountains as a whole at work right from this vantage point. From where we sit, you can see a range of mountains in the distance, and those are called the Little San Bernardino Mountains. And basically all of those mountains are part of Joshua Tree National Park. And just below those mountains, you can see a lighter colored range of hills, and those are called the Indio Hills. The important thing about the Indio Hills is that they essentially represent the San Andreas Fault as it runs through the Coachella Valley. And in fact, both the Indio Hills and the Little San Bernardino Mountains were formed by the movement of the fault. So the mountains there are a sign of the tremendous geological forces underneath our feet. In fact, we've got 2 enormous bodies of rock coming together right here in the Coachella Valley. On the far side, the north side of the Coachella Valley, is the North American Plate, which connects all the way to the Atlantic Ocean. That's all one big body of rock moving around together. And where we're sitting now in Carrizo Canyon, we're actually sitting on the Pacific Plate. Even though we're on land, we're on the same part of the crust that the Pacific Ocean is on, all the way to Asia. Now you can see evidence for how the 2 different plates, the 2 different geological groups, have influenced the plants and animals on either side when you go for a hike here. So for example, the bighorn sheep that we're seeing right over our heads here are called Peninsular Bighorn Sheep, and they're separate from the desert bighorn sheep, which you would find in the mountains on that side of the valley. They're their own separate population, separated by the geology in between. We also see desert agave in Carrizo Canyon here, which is a species of plant that's found throughout the Santa Rosa and San Jacinto Mountains. But if you go over there to Joshua Tree, you won't find any desert agaves, or any agaves of any type, but you will see Joshua trees, which we don't see on this side. So we've got these 2 big plates coming, moving past each other, and originally there was another plate between them called the Farallon Plate. As the 2 plates were moving towards each other, the Farallon Plate got caught in the middle and got pushed underneath. And when we got there, it was so hot that it melted and turned into magma and became less dense. And like hot and less dense things tend to do, it rose to the surface and started to push up the rocks around it. So when we're sitting here in Carrizo Canyon, what we're seeing are the old rocks that came before the Farallon Plate, the remains of the Farallon Plate, pushed to the surface. If you drive up Highway 74 and you go to Idlewild or up on the tram, what you're seeing there are the exposed granitic rocks that make up, or that were used to make up, the Farallon Plate. They created this ridge of mountains running all the way from Baja California up into the Sierra Nevadas. And those mountains are what have created this rain shadow desert on the eastern side of California. Thank you for joining us in our exploration of Carrizo Canyon. You'll finish here on the trail looking down into these wonderful California native fan palms. It's wonderful to see the contrast here between these really healthy ones and that dead one that we saw down below. If you're watching this in October, November, or December, and you have a chance to come out to Carrizo Canyon, it's not to be missed. If you're watching it for the rest of the year, mark your calendar for when the canyon reopens and you can come in here and enjoy it for yourself.